Let's go ahead and get started with our first panel. Negotiated service agreements. We'll discuss the history of the negotiated service agreement program and concerns that may exist today. And I've asked each of the panelists to give a brief introduction of sort of their history and involvement with the post office, where they are today and who their constituents are, and what sort of hot button issues they're monitoring today.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Plunkett. I'm the president and CEO of the Association for Postal Commerce, better known as Postcom. Postcom is a trade association that represents companies involved in the mailing industry along a lot of different dimensions. We represent large first-class and marketing mail owners like major banks. We represent service providers who provide production and other services on behalf of those mail owners. We represent transportation and logistics companies that move mail around the system. And we represent software companies who provide sort of back-end support. And we also represent major shippers. Our members include UPS, FedEx, Amazon, and DHL. So we try to represent the entire mailing industry, and we provide mainly advocacy and educational services for our members. To the extent anyone does have any concerns about the current status of the NSA system, I apologize. I negotiated the first NSA with Capital One back in the early part of the century, and I was involved in the litigation of that NSA because back then it was pre-PAEA and everything had to go to the Postal Rate Commission for approval. So I was the lead negotiator and the expert witness in the first few NSA cases.
I am Kate Muth. I am the executive director of the International Mailers Advisory Group. I started in the industry as a trade reporter, so I kind of can understand what Teddy was talking about in covering the Postal Service. I did that for about 10 years. And I then got into the association business, worked for about 4 or 5 years for Postcom. And now I run IMAG, as we're known, and we represent primarily U.S.-based outbound consolidators. So they are mailers and shippers that primarily, as I said, outbound. We do have some inbound shippers as well. Most of the growth is in the e-commerce business around packets, and that's where a lot of our members are seeing their biggest growth as well. International has gotten a little bit more on the radar screen these days with a lot of discussion around things like terminal dues and the Universal Postal Union. But our members are interesting in that they are competitors of each other. They are also partners. They use the Postal Service Postal Service products when that makes the most sense for their end customers, but they'll also use the integrators, UPS and FedEx. They'll also partner with UPS and FedEx to offer products, and they also use the foreign posts, or what is commonly known as ETOs, the foreign posts that have offices of exchange in the United States. So it's really about serving the customer with whatever product or service level that they need. So.
My name is Bert Hamilton. I'm the president CEO of Harvey Software Incorporated. Harvey Software is a 35-year-old company that provides multi-carrier software for the U.S. Postal Service, UPS, FedEx, other local carriers. We've been doing this, as I said, for 35 years. I was one of the founders. We supply software and focus on the needs of medium to high volume shippers. We have been a strategic think tank basically for all the carriers to develop new products. Like for instance, when you get a email with a tracking link on it and you go to a tracking website, we actually came up with that in the 90s as a concept. And there's a lot of things that we've done over the years for all the carriers, but our focus is on our clients. The reason we've done this is basically we're carrier neutral. We try to come up with good ideas with carriers to serve our clients, and we serve companies that are some of the largest shippers in the United States, or have been. The reason I'm at this meeting is the decisions used by the NSA, or the agreements, have actually resulted in cannibalization of about 59% of our customer base. That's because that we have not been privy to be able to give the same type of rates to our customers, mainly because of our agreements with our customers, and have been been unable to do that, and that's why I'm here today.
So before we jump in, Mike, if you wouldn't mind giving us sort of a brief history of the NSA program, what the approval process was like, and what the USPS hoped to accomplish from the program.
Okay, so early on, it was interesting that Lori referenced the transformation plan from 2002. Back at that time, there was a lot of beginning of discussion about the need to reform the Postal Service because there were concerns about the long-term viability of the network. But within the Postal Service, there was discussion, well, to make that case, we sort of have to at least demonstrate that we're trying to explore the boundaries of what's possible under the current law. So soon after Jack Potter became the Postmaster General, he created, he wiped out my department, and then he took my boss and made him the VP of pricing, who asked me to come over and say, well, we'd like to see if we can do negotiated pricing in market-dominant, well, they weren't market-dominant products, they were domestic products. Prior to that, the Postal Service did have contract pricing for international products called International Customized Mail Agreements. So that was the mandate to see if we could do it. I heard a pitch from Capital One. They were a massive user of first-class mail for advertising back in the early 20th century, which created a significant opportunity for the Postal Service because advertising is largely discretionary, unlike a lot of first-class mail. But because it's advertising, a lot of it was being sent to lists and generating huge amounts of returns, which was very costly. So we negotiated a way to trade off, a way for them to take some costs away from the Postal Service in exchange for incentives for additional volume. And the notion was we thought we could use pricing as a tool to generate more business and to solve some otherwise tricky business problems that are harder to solve without just putting the hammer down on a customer, which you never want to do. Unfortunately, the regulator, they kind of threw a wrench in the works from day one, and that kind of hampered the Postal Service efforts to really do much with negotiated pricing. Subsequently, of course, PAEA was passed in 2006, and it explicitly endorsed the Postal Service being able to do negotiated service agreements. Unfortunately, now 11 years later, there are hundreds of them on what is now the competitive side of the business, whereas on the market dominant side, there are actually fewer now than there were before PAEA was passed. Certainly not the intent, and I think we have to look at some things that the Postal Service and the regulator have done that I think sort of nullified the intended benefits of PAEA with regards to negotiated pricing.
One of the broader questions I have for everyone on the panel is, how do we think about, or how does the USPS think about what constitutes a good deal? Is that the right framework? And is the USPS getting good deals through the negotiated service agreement program? Do you want to start, Bert? We can just go down this way.
I'm not sure that the post office is getting a good deal. From what I know about the deals that I've seen offered by other carriers, it boggles my mind that they're doing it for so cheap. But especially since they were already the lowest price in the marketplace to start with. So I have a hard time answering that question. I only see the outside infrastructure and how what they're doing is what the end results are. They've been doing to companies like ours.
Well, we don't know what's in any customer's contract. That's confidential. I will say that the Postal Service operates in the competitive market. It has market dominance. Our members are totally in the competitive side of the business, of the marketplace, and so they have something of a charge to operate like a business in that space. And this is what other businesses do. They offer contracts, negotiated agreements. So for the Postal Service and its customers, to me, they have to offer some kind of agreement. Otherwise, they just simply can't operate in that space. So I think from our members' perspective, the contracts have worked well in the sense of that provides a framework by which they will use the postal system. But as I said, if the service isn't good enough, or the scans aren't good enough, or the product isn't exactly what they want, they'll use somebody else in that space, or going to a certain lane, going to a certain country. But ultimately we don't know what's in the contracts. So but again, I don't know what a member has in a contract with UPS or FedEx either. That's just the nature of contracts.
And full disclosure, I have no insight whatsoever into what any of our members pay for shipping services. I'd echo what Kate said, but also point out that people should be very careful if you're not directly involved in negotiations or responsible for the outcome in declaring something to be either a good or a bad deal, because you don't have enough insight to really know. What I would say, though, is there's reason for skepticism right now because of the accountability vacuum that the Postal Service faces. There are no governors, so there's really no one to provide any, questioning of management. So normally the governors would be very active in any large-scale negotiation and giving guidance to postal management. Without them there, it creates skepticism. I think there's another factor, which is the Postal Service, while legally authorized to compete, and subject to some non-trivial regulation, it doesn't report on its profitability in the way that its competitors do. There's no shareholders, so that also creates confusion and maybe misunderstanding and skepticism.
And one of the big knocks on the post office, or observers have commented that maybe the post office is wrongly focused on volume over profitable volume. Do y'all have any thoughts on that?
Well, I just wanted to sort of comment on something that Mike said. There is no board of governors, but I would kind of argue the Postal Service has 535 board member where they can't do a lot of things because Congress steps in and thwarts it or stops it or hampers their ability. So they operate in a very odd space. It's very difficult, and I'm getting a little bit out of just this going back to what I used to cover, but for instance, if they want to close a post office or they want to give up Saturday delivery, they simply can't do it. Even if it shows $1 billion in savings, Congress won't let them. So, they operate in a very odd space. It's difficult to truly act like a business when you don't have full control of your costs. You don't have the tools to fully control your costs. I think in the international, what I do know about the contracts is at least what they're called Global Plus. They are not. There's a set of contracts that are not volume based. There's essentially, there's probably a minimum volume amount, but most of the members have the same discount off of the list price. So it really was created in a way to get my members not just my members, but anybody who's in the international consolidation business to go out and sell Postal Service products. And certain Postal Service international products you can only get International Priority Airlift, International Surface Airlift by using a consolidator because they do all the onboarding, they do the preparation, they do all the pieces of it. So to get that product, you need to use a consolidator. So, and my understanding is everybody's kind of getting the same discount off of the list price. So.
Something I want to point out is we talk about the Postal Service as though it's a sort of unified, monolithic entity where everyone's sort of making the same decisions, pulling in the same directions. That's not the case. So there are certainly people within the Postal Service who are probably motivated to chase volume at any price. But simultaneously, there are people inside the Postal Service working as checks against that. And I'm going to oversimplify. Obviously salespeople care about how much volume they're bringing in, but you've got every deal has to be signed off on by the chief financial officer, and they have been skeptics about NSAs from day one. You'd not believe some things they used to do. Anyway, so there are internal people at the Postal Service who are acting as watchdogs over the people that might be irresponsibly chasing volume. So there are safeguards against some of that.
Every contract that I know of that I can talk about, volume was the key issue. They were talking about how much volume to be able to get the contract, how much volume they had to maintain on a monthly basis or a yearly basis. It's different than the international because most of these are domestic shippers, even though I do deal in both. But it's a completely different world, and which I agree with you. Volume has been a key thing, and to my surprise, when I look at all the carriers, because I've been involved in every single type of contract, whether it's from the post office or with a lot of our customers, because they ask me questions and so forth to help them with them a lot of times. There isn't a whole lot of profit or revenue based in the postal contracts. They're mostly all volume, where the other carriers, when they do it, usually are looking at what the profitability is at that given volume. So that's where Lori was talking about today, that there's a real confusion going on what the parameters are to base it on, I think. And I think that's how it comes up and we get in the positions we are. Our company, when we first released our product of support for the U.S. Postal Service back in the 1990s, we could only get about 5% of our customers to even be interested in using the software that we'd created for the post office. I went back to the post office and kind of carried the message of my clients of why, and they made changes in those areas, and we continue to offer it along with the other carriers we supported, and we watched the increase of volume going from 5% up to nearly 43% of their monthly volume going out the post office. At no time in that were they giving any more than just standard postal rates. And then long around 2007-ish, I think, when the NSA started showing up, we started seeing customers with a given volume moving over to applications with a different volume because they cut an NSA with them, and they moved away from us and over to other software because those people were able to bring them better prices. So the ultimate gain for the post office was a negative number in sales because the volume didn't change. But yet they based all those things on volume that they were bringing in. So volume has been a key important thing for the post office, I think, and they look at it constantly. They change the minimums constantly. I've seen that happen as they've been doing more and more. It's going down, how much they require. But I think it's key to all the carriers. But I think how the post office looks at it is completely different than the rest of them.
I want to touch on the oversight and monitoring of these NSAs after they're, well, I guess up front, someone signs off on them, and in theory, the Postal Regulatory Commission has to approve them, but the Postal Regulatory Commission will tell you that for competitive NSAs, they're not looking at where the volume is coming from. They're just looking at the contract in a vacuum. Does this satisfy the volume requirements? So to the extent, as has happened in Bert's case, where parties or entities, counterparties to NSAs are maintaining their volume by taking existing USPS volume, how is the USPS monitoring that? Or are they not?
That's a good question. I don't know to what extent they do analysis to understand migration between different consolidators, which is what this sounds like. When I was there, we had, again, it is a different time. We would not engage in certain contracts with people who could then, broker those contracts for somebody else to consolidate volume under them because we thought that would be a race to the bottom. So we did not have that practice in place then. To the extent that happens now, I'm not really sure, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure either how they monitor. Now, I know in the international you can see through the permit, where the permit information and the data, the advanced data or the electronic data provides a lot of information about where the volume is coming from. So you ultimately do know who the mail owner is. It's not like that's information that is available. I'm pretty sure in domestic as well.
I want to point out that the possibility of cannibalization across different distribution channels is not unique to the shipping or mailing industry. That happens in all industries. And most organizations have some kind of channel management strategy to make sure that what's available in one channel is not abused by another channel who would then take it and siphon off revenues. How the Postal Service is structured to prevent that, I don't really know.
When it comes to monitoring that, as far as our customers are concerned, we support. Well, we started by supporting mail manifesting, which was the old manual way of doing it. We did that for a long time, and we added PC postage in about 2004, 2005 as one of the options, which is another way all of a sudden that they gained statistics, because the manual method, they were generating reports every day this high from some of our large shippers, and how that data ever got anywhere, I don't know. So it probably wasn't monitored well at all. But the minute they went to PC postage, it was all electronic, so it was easier to monitor. But PC postage wasn't the answer. We had to continue that, so we went on and helped the post office understand our customers' needs for EVS. And then once they adapted and got all the pieces in there we needed for our customers, we switched to EVS as another, and converted all our manifests. So the volume in those cases all of a sudden went from unknown to where it was very known by the post office. And so all of the stuff that's going on right now is very known by the post office, because it's all electronic now, where it used to be manual and it never got entered in.
I want to talk a little bit about maybe the idea of the USPS picking winners and losers by not making the same rates available to all people. So, Kate, your constituents, consolidators, do work share agreements with the post office, which entitles them to discounted rates and services that other people won't get. To what extent is it fair for the USPS, or does that privilege larger companies that have the resources and the staff to take on some of the labor forces that otherwise would be handled by the USPS?
Well, I think certainly the agreements are made. Again, as I was saying, it's a little bit unique in that some of the contracts, the discount is the same off of the list price if you're really big or you're slightly big or you're mid-size consolidator. But also frankly, I think it's the way you have to operate in the space, because you're competing with other entities. You're competing with the integrators. You're competing with the foreign posts. You're competing with new entrants into the market. And, what I found among our members is they'll partner with each other to get, this was what we used to call linkage, where someone would kind of link to another person's permit to get kind of work with them to supply a portion of their customer base. And so it's sort of created some partnerships among competitors in ways, but I don't know how the Postal Service would operate in the competitive market if it didn't have the flexibility to offer negotiated prices and contracts. And, it's just the nature of business, I guess. It's an opportunity to provide the most products and services to the end user customer. And I think of it like the movement in so many other industries is towards that dynamic pricing, that customized pricing.
It's very difficult to find an example of any other good or service that is priced uniformly across all users. Even catalogers, if 10 of us get the LL Bean catalog, the same shirt doesn't have the same price in all 10. It just doesn't work that way. There's another secondary issue here, which is we have members across the entire mailing industry. It's not always easy to get them to unite on specific issues. One thing they do unite on, though, is we want the Postal Service to be as efficient as it possibly can. And to some extent, that means them engaging in normal business activities, because there's a significant learning component to price differentiation. When you have a single price for every single customer, you get less information about how good you are at providing goods and services. When you have an opportunity to price differentiate and charge different prices, you can get better as an organization, and everyone should want that. And one last thing, which is, The notion of fairness depends on where you're sitting, right? If I'm the largest shipper in the world, I would think it not fair at all if I'm paying the exact same price to ship something as me, who sends maybe 5 or 6 packages a year. So uniformity is not equivalent to fairness.
I totally agree with that. In our situation, though, I've seen something that's a little bit different in that the NSAs, well, for example, since we have a whole gamut of different solutions that we offer, EVS being one of them, if I have a customer that wants to go, that's been using PC postage all along, and they have established an NSA of some sort through the PC postage vendor, and they go to EVS, because we're carrier neutral. If they want an NSA with the post office, we send the customer to the appropriate person in the marketing department, and they cut the NSA with them. Then we support those prices. In that scenario, that sounds like it'd be cut and dried. If they already have an NSA with the PC postage vendor, they should probably be able to get the same price or a similar price or a better price, depending on what they're willing to offer. Like you were saying, different things. But the thing of it is, they can't. When the customers go directly to the post office, they cannot make as good of deal as they could if they shipped through the PC postage vendor. So I can't switch them over to EVS, which EVS is actually more efficient for the post office to use in the first place. It gives 100% of the profits for the post office back, well, revenue, I'm sorry, I'm thinking of another carrier, revenue back to the post office, whereas the other part they have to share revenue with the PC postage vendor. So it's a much more cost-effective way for them to go, but when they go to marketing at the U.S. Postal Service, our customers are told they can't cut as good a deal as they're getting from the PC postage vendor through our software. So it's the same software, same pieces, same or more volume, and but yet they won't cut the same deal. And by doing that, what'll turn around and will happen is the PC postage vendors a lot of times have their own business partners or own companies that they've purchased, and they will say, well, I can keep the same agreement if you switch to one of our companies, and thus we are cannibalized. So that is a key methodology for doing that.
And when your customers leave you, what do they complain about? Your technology, your service offering, anything like that, or is it all based on price?
Well, what comes to mind is a customer that started using our software in 2003 that I just lost yesterday. To this exact scenario. They ship probably somewhere in the vicinity of about 5,000 pieces per day. They told us that we had the best technology out there. It was far too superior to anything they'd been offered. They said they're going to APIs, which we do not use APIs. We use all of the rates and everything are built internally, and we upload at the end of the day and that sort of thing. We do periodic uploads if they're wanting tracking stuff, but for the most part, it's very, very fast. One PC can do 15,000 packages a day in our case, which can't be done on an API-based system. So they said, we know it's going to be slower. We know it's going to have less features. We know that the support is not going to be as good as what you've got. You've got the best support in the industry. But the accounting department told us that we're going to have to switch because they're making almost 60% cheaper rates on the post office. And those, yeah, so that's what I deal with. Not, that happened yesterday. I have the email if anybody'd like to see it. But actually, I can't show you. It's from my customer. But I hear that every single time. That's what I've been listening to for the last 3 years. Is customers leaving, telling us we've got the best solution technology-wise out there. They said there's no question. They know we're an innovator that have created a lot of it, but that's what we're dealing with. So.
I wanted to talk about international a little bit. So what are, there's been a lot of focus on UPU. There's legislation. There was a Wall Street Journal op-ed about cheap goods coming in from China. What are your constituents focused on? What are they tracking? Is there a concern that if the USPS increases rates dramatically in its negotiations with China Post, that other nations will retaliate, which will harm your constituents?
Well, I think mostly we are outbound, but on the inbound piece of it, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. That terminal dues is what countries pay each other for cross-border delivery. Mailers and shippers pay postage rates, so terminal dues just makes up a portion of that. On some of that on the inbound, if China Post subsidizes the domestic portion of that trip and the airlift portion of that trip, the Postal Service can't really do anything about that. So what we're a little bit more worried about, and I don't want to sound like I'm arguing for the status quo in terminal dues, because that's not really the case. I think we agree. We realize you have to move towards what's called self-declared, where you're setting a rate. What we're a little more worried about is that if the U.S. doesn't get the position it wants in the Extraordinary Congress and decides to just not abide by any portion of the acts of the UPU, that sets the operational standards as well. And that worries us a little bit if we just decide to walk away from the UPU acts altogether, because all of these businesses, there's operational standards about what defines a letter, what's, containerization, quality of service, and those sorts of things. And all of my members, and yes, we are worried about reciprocity, that if we decide to tie those inbound pieces to a domestic rate that's somewhat high-cost countries will do the same, and then outbound prices will go up. That is a concern. There's also a concern that a country will just stop taking U.S. mail. And I know folks say, oh, that's not realistic, but we're already hearing that some Caribbean countries, if they're not going to get paid terminal dues, they're not going to take U.S. mail. So, or they'll slow down U.S. mail. The service will deteriorate. So, those are the issues that we worry about around terminal dues. It's really the broader implications of just walking away from the acts, from the agreement set in the Istanbul Congress, and what will come out of this extraordinary Congress in Ethiopia in the fall.
The other thing I wanted to touch on is the USPS essentially, it seems like it's almost outsourcing its marketing, right? And its sales efforts. It's provided certain companies with the ability to provide and customers with the ability to print postage, and giving the technology to those entities. And given the financial condition of the post office, why not just do it yourself and cut out the middleman?
Well, there's a couple of possible answers to that question. And one is that I'm not sure the Postal Service is very good at customer service. And so if they're not, it would make sense to allow somebody who is better at it to perform that part of the value chain. And that would just be a rational business decision. And the Postal Service has historically had great difficulty in communicating effectively and providing customer service to consumers and small businesses. If you've been in a post office, it's not a great retail environment. And so it would be a rational business decision for them to offload that activity onto people who could do it better. And I would argue we believe it's problematic for the Postal Service to be actively competing against companies for whom they set regulations. And the Postal Service does set regulations for people in the mailing industry. And if they engage in parts of the value chain that could be more effectively performed by companies in the private sector, that becomes problematic. And so we like to make sure that the Postal Service doesn't put itself in a position where it can use its monopoly power and its ability to set regulations to allow them to compete unfairly with private sector operators. So that's a concern for us and our members.
Kind of echoing what Mike said, our members see themselves as an extension of the sales force to some degree. They sell very well, but that customer service piece is key. So if you're a seller on the eBay platform and you're getting a little bit bigger and you want to expand into the cross-border market, and you decide to use a consolidator to do that, if your package goes missing or you don't get your package, it goes missing, or you don't get the scans, you're not calling the Postal Service. You're calling Globegistics, APC Logistics. You're calling any number of, you're calling your consolidator. And I follow all of my members on the various social media platforms. And I don't know if you've ever gone on and you'll see there'll be a tweet like and I won't say company name, XYZ company, where's my packet? And they'll get right back to them and say, DM us with your tracking information and we'll get right back to you. Now, I've seen some of the comments that the Postal Service on social media around lost my package. I mean, if you ever go on the OIG website, most of the comments about anything they put up there is, where's my package? So yes, customer service is a huge part of it. And then just one final thing around in international, there is an international sales force, and they'll go out and sell Postal Service products, and maybe they'll sell the First Class Mail International or the GXG Global Express. They're the higher priced products, and they'll sell it, they'll try to sell it, and the customer will say, geez, that's pretty expensive. Do you have anything a little bit more of an economy product? We're working with them, and we're making progress. Now they're coming in together, U.S. salesperson and a consolidator who can offer those products, because as I said, to get IPA or commercial e-packet outbound, you need to use a consolidator. So we kind of see ourselves as partners in extension. Go for the gold. If you get that high-end, super high-end product that somebody wants to use internationally, Postal Service can run with it. If they need something a little more economy, they want to test the waters in cross-border e-commerce, bring one of our guys in or gals in and see if that's the right fit.
You're saying the marketing part of it being outsourced,
And
right?
also the technology, right?
Right.
It's the ability to print labels.
And I think that's key, what you just said, because I think having a marketing organization provide the technology sometimes is problematic. That's because the goal of the marketing technology will be to gain as much as they can during the automation to be able to sell more product. And they'll want the technology to be focused on what the customer is doing. I mean, we're all talking, look at Facebook, look at all these others. They're all wanting to look at what the data says about that customer so they can do a profile of the customers and seek out the better ones. And so they bend the technology in that direction, where if the post office was to look at technology a little bit different, now customer service for the technology, meaning technical support, making that can fall under both realms. I see that in a middle ground. But I think I have a serious concern because I see, like for instance, to receive an NSA, you have to be willing to provide the post office certain information about the competitors that they also ship with. And if a customer wants to give that out, that's fine. But I'm not so sure that it's fine for the marketing organization to collect that without the customer's knowledge and then provide that to the post office. That's how technology could be misused for a marketing organization that does both the technology and the marketing. And that's going on.
The Postal Service requires that potential NSA customers provide information about their use of competitor products?
I can't answer that question. I'm under a non-disclosure.
One of the things I want to talk about, so there's a lot of attention on the post office, right? Donald Trump is tweeting out about Amazon, his relationship, or, I guess he's got a personal dislike for Amazon. But there is this task force, and there's also this ongoing OIG audit that's looking at USPS postal partners. What sort of changes, if any, do you imagine coming out of this? And I thought I'd start with you because I know there was an article out that you've met with the task force twice.
Yeah. I don't know, because we expect them to issue a report and some recommendations, but really they don't have the authority to change the law. And most of what governs behavior of the Postal Service or the Regulatory Commission is written into the law. So it's not clear that there'll be an immediate impact. We anticipate that they will opine on competitive issues. I'll be honest, though, that was not a major topic of discussion when we met with them, partly because of who we brought with us, and we were focused primarily on the mail part of the network. So we didn't really field a lot of questions on that topic area.
We're going in on Friday to meet with the task force. We've had some phone conversations leading up to it. We're operating in a slightly different space. We don't particularly care about the last mile delivery. The price cap doesn't really matter to my constituents. Just given my long history here, I think Lori raised some very interesting points. I would love to see the task force really dive into the universal service obligation question. What should it be in today's age? Does it make sense to have 6-day-a-week delivery? Do we need 30,000 post offices? Could 3-day delivery be imaginable as it is in New Zealand and other places? I hope that's what we get to. I don't know, just given the short time frame that they have, and I hear it's a very. I hear the staff's very thoughtful and very dedicated, but it's not a really big staff. I mean, if you look back at the President's Commission from 2003, maybe, there's a series of public meetings. There was Federal Register. There was meetings that were sort of with individual groups. I just don't know that they have the time. But frankly, I'm glad it's being put out there on the table, because these are the issues, and Lori addressed them perfectly. Is what should the Postal Service look like in an age of e-commerce and changing communications?
Could I hear your question again?
You
got me
I'm
lost here.
wondering what sort of changes you envision or would like to see come out of either the task force or the USPS. I guess it's the Risk Analysis Research Center of the OIGs looking at postal partners.
I would like to see as a carrier neutral provider, I would like to be able to send my customer to someone at the post office when they want to negotiate rates, and they can negotiate an NSA with them. And when that NSA is done, it comes back to me, and I put the rates in the software. That's the perfect world scenario. I don't think it's right, or I have agreements with my clients that I don't share their information. I don't think it's right that they do that. So and I don't think it's right to ask me for it. That's up to the customer if they want to do that. But that would be the scenario that I think it should be. And I don't think the post office should be deciding who the winners and losers are just based on that premise.
I think we're going to turn it over to the audience for questions. Thank you all very much. Any questions? Ted?
So I guess I think the question I have is there's sort of this almost like deference to letting the post office negotiate these agreements because that's what businesses do. But we're listening to the results of a series of NSAs that were designed to allow for outsourcing of postage in the the postage industry, the postal partners, and it doesn't sound like a functioning market. Just listening to the description of the how the competition works, is focused on volume. It does sound like a race to the bottom. It doesn't seem like the oversight is in place that there would need to be to have a healthy, fair competition focused on the outcomes that we talked about, customer service, things like that. So why, if and then obviously the Postal Service, if it were running like a business so well, maybe making more money, right? Like, so I guess they're just like, the evidence doesn't seem to suggest that the decision making when it comes to acting like a business results in either A, markets that are competitive and fair for each of the businesses that are innovating or otherwise providing a good service, or B, making money for the Postal Service so that they can invest and have a sustainable business model. So I guess my question is, why, given that the evidence suggests that they're bad at making those decisions, do you think there should be this deference to just letting them keep doing it?
Well, I guess I don't necessarily, other than the PC postage realm, which I'm not as familiar with, and just learning a lot about it right now. I don't know that they're so bad at it. I guess I'm asking, what's the evidence that that they're bad at it, other than it's just.
I mean, there's obviously, we're doing a whole conference about how they're not making money, how they're not making, just the business decisions would, if you're making good business decisions, ostensibly you end up making money. The only thing we can look at is the results, right? Like, so you can say, yeah, we can't see the agreements, but we can see the results. And the results are that they're losing money, their costs are going up. We heard from Lori, the cost in the package industry is going up. So the privately negotiated deals, the big ones, are in Parcel Select, and the other one that we've seen a lot of controversy around is the postage partners. So the ones that have gotten a lot of scrutiny, and there has been a dialogue about the decisions, the evidence suggests that the decisions are not how a business would make a decision, or that they're not doing a good job at doing that.
I guess I would say the costs are going up for a lot of reasons. I mean, you have delivery vehicles that were built for letters, and now you're handling more packages, and those delivery vehicles are extremely old. You have a cost of going, you have labor costs of delivering whatever the labor costs are for delivery and that kind of thing. I would suspect it's more than just the deal. So this is a very, as we talked about, a very big and complex issue. I'll just speak to the international arena. If there weren't contracts, or there weren't the ability to kind of negotiate, really it's work sharing. If the members couldn't provide a work sharing arrangement where they enter the product at the International Service Center, and really you've taken away almost all handling and processing costs for the Postal Service, I just don't know that someone would use the Postal Service. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even know that they would be able to operate in that market. So, and I'm probably not an expert on this. Maybe Mike could speak to it a little better. But there are certainly a lot of costs. And as I said, Postal Service doesn't really have all the tools it needs to reduce its costs. And frankly, the unfunded liabilities and some of that add to the costs. Of having, even though I don't think they're not paying into it anymore, but at one time they were $5 billion a year. So it's not the same as a business in that sense. And I don't know if I'm really answering the question, but I just think that it's a little more complicated than just, is it a good deal, bad deal?
And I would say there's two separate issues. One is the Postal Service making good decisions? Since we don't know the contents of the contracts, and since really those results are, they're obscured by the overall size of the Postal Service as an enterprise. So teasing out exactly how much of that is attributable to negotiations is really hard to do. But there's the other issue where I think I agree with your premise, which is if they were making bad decisions, what's the appropriate remedy? It's not necessarily to tell them to stop doing that. It's to put in place better accountability and better oversight to make sure that the decisions improve over time. And that's where not having governors and having, I don't mean to cast aspersions on anyone. The Postal Regulatory Commission is somewhat schizophrenic when it comes to how it deals with Postal Service pricing decisions. They do give a lot of deference on the competitive side, whereas on the market dominant side, they are more willing to second-guess Postal Service decisions on pricing than any other dimension of postal management activity. So I would say it's in everyone's interest to ensure that the Postal Service makes good decisions. The way to do that under the current law is by better accountability through better governance. And with no governors in place and with the commissioner seat vacant, we're not in a very good situation right now.
Let me give you a scenario. Lori, you said a fantastic thing today when you said to look at a problem, you got to go back and look at what your results and what you're trying to obtain in the first place and work backwards into it. I've done that all my life too. When I look at a technology problem, I always look at, okay, what are you trying to achieve? The whole idea to me, whenever I worked with a carrier other than the post office, to have a contract for discounted rates was to gain more volume and was to gain more of their business. And that's what the post office should be thinking when they're going in with a contract. And that's why I think the contract should be between the customer and the post office, no other third parties taking a cut in the middle. Because what we're seeing right now is, in our scenario, I took our customers from where they were shipping 5% of the post office in the 1990s up to 40+% on a monthly basis without giving them any rate difference whatsoever. They were doing standard postal rates. And I didn't do that as an effort to increase business for the post office. My customers wanted to use the service. So I went to the post office and said, you need to do this with tracking. You need to do this with EVS. You need to do these things over the years. And I showed them what needed to be done, and they did it. And all of a sudden I gained stuff. Now you're talking about coming in with contracts to those same customers that are shipping high volumes at standard postal rates because it's the best rate. It outperforms all their other carriers. Oh, and you're saying to them, I'll give you a 50 to 60% discount if you'll switch over to doing the same thing with the same volume through PC postage or through a discount reseller, this sort of thing. All of a sudden in my head, it's like, okay, what was the end product? The end product was to gain more volume, more business, which would help pay these bills for the post office and revenue. But what is happening, they move the existing volume over to this other source, and all of a sudden the post office is getting less money, because in the case from us, they were getting 100% of that revenue. Our company doesn't take any per piece revenue for anything we do. We feel it's in violation of our customers' best interest. So, you know, that's where I see the problem with what you were saying. I think that we need to look at, the post office needs to look at, maybe I'm small, I don't understand the post office, and I'm looking at it from my perspective, but they need to look at what the purpose of that NSA was. That NSA, when they put it out there, should have been to gain new postal volume. And and that's what all the other carriers, that's why they give a contract out, because they want to gain more UPS volume, more FedEx volume, more speedy delivery volume, even for little companies. It's true across the board, but the post office gives the discounts so that one of their vendors can make more money, which makes no sense to me. And maybe that's because I don't understand the post office, but I do understand business.
We may be like talking about two separate issues here. One is how the Postal Service negotiates for shipping business, and the other is how it manages the PC postage industry. So the issues are probably very different between one and the other, but I'm going to circle back to what I said before. If that were happening, right, and I don't doubt for a minute what you say, then if that were happening in a private sector company, and they were destroying value in that way, then the shareholders would do something about it. The share price would fall. There would be action to change management, or they would be bought out by somebody. And here, again, I'm going to go back to this accountability vacuum. There's no comparable mechanism. If the Postal Service is making bad decisions, there's no way to correct those decisions. And that's why, for our members, the most important priority right now is getting governors in place to actually provide some immediate oversight, because by the time Lori's group gets involved, or by the time the OIG gets involved, so much time has passed that you're really not going to remedy something that should have been remedied sooner.
Hi, Jake Thomas is from the OIG. So if oversight and accountability are the solution here, what about the PRC? As you said, the PRC takes a pretty, they give the Postal Service a lot of leeway when it comes to competitive products. And in the case of NSAs, the Postal Service merely needs to prove that an NSA is profitable by $1, and the PRC will approve it. Should the PRC potentially be scrutinizing these deals a little more and set a higher bar for what is an acceptable NSA? That would provide the oversight that you're talking about as a solution to make sure these are better deals.
That would be a great question to ask them. I mean, they are nominally the group that is supposed to regulate the Postal Service's business. They've got a specific method for evaluating negotiated service agreements. How they arrived at that, I don't know, but that's really a question for them.
Yeah, I don't know either. I mean, I have to assume they're meeting the the law's requirements. I'm sure they are, but I don't know exactly what goes into evaluating, what the criteria are, other than does it cover its costs, and is it available to similarly situated mailers? And I don't know, is there an efficiency component in that, Mike, that they have to consider?
No. No.
Yeah,
And what are they calling their costs?
That's a much broader topic area. I mean, the Postal Regulatory Commission measures the direct costs for the products, and that's what they use as the basis for evaluating all pricing decisions, not just NSAs.
But when you look at the bottom line, it doesn't look like they're covering their costs.
Well, that's if you look at the
I mean, I'm talking
institution
like a
in aggregate.
shareholder here.
Oh, look, they're losing money. There's no two ways about that.
Yeah.
How much of that but again, that's a complicated and complex issue, and there are, as Lori pointed out, there's so many things beyond their control. Pinning all of that on pricing decisions, that's a leap.
What you were saying is exactly the scenario I've seen from the customers. They go through negotiations with the marketing people, because I hear little snippets back and forth of that, and then when it's all done, the marketing people at USPS then go to the PRC to get it approved, and if they're showing a profit, then the approval's made.
Yep.
And but I've always questioned if they're covering their costs, because for some reason, when I look at all the other carriers, I know they're covering their costs when they do it. When I look at the post office, because of the bottom line, I keep questioning, and maybe it's I'm naive about how big it is. I haven't had time to study that's not my job. But they should be at least breaking even, and going to taxpayers to ask for bailouts on a regular basis is not breaking even.
But they haven't actually done that, and just to keep in mind that like 70% of contribution or profit comes from the market dominant products, maybe even first class mail, or just the market dominant products. So, and as Mike said, there's maybe one market dominant product NSA still in there. So I kind of have to agree with him that it's sort of a leap to pin it all on the pricing. And they have a price cap on that 70% of its. They can't raise it above CPI within products. So there's some limitation there.
Hi, I'm John Callan from Ursa Major Associates, and to Mike's point a minute ago, seems to me we're talking about two very different parts of the business here. NSAs for parcels, which is a lot of what we're talking about in terms of understanding whether there's a cost that USPS is being ripped off by Amazon, as the president thinks, or whether they were making any money there. And PC postage, are we not? And I mean, because Bert, are you talking about the parcel business, or are you
Strictly parcel. Yeah,
strictly parcel?
yeah, our companies are all parcels. Yeah.
But isn't there isn't it?
Yeah, PC
Yes.
postage is used on.
Yeah, and isn't that really the elephant in the room, the PC postage issue, and the fact that there's, going way back to IBIP, there's only a few companies have authority there. I mean,
People
I think it's sort of foggy here. What we're really trying to get at the problem, and it seems like that's where the problem is.
That's a good question, to be honest with you, because the NSA agreement with Amazon and the post office, or with any other company that they've done business with, I know Donald Trump focused on Amazon. I think there was probably other reasons for that also. But I'm not sure that Amazon wasn't doing what every other company that has an NSA is doing at the time. They're probably just knowing that it's available. They went to the post office and saw what kind of deal they could make. I don't think there was any. They looked at the volumes, they used their criteria, they put it before the PRC, and the PRC approved it. I think that's what's happening, and I think there's a lot of differences. Amazon, I know for a fact, and UPS, which has postal services, Mail Innovations and SurePost, which we support in our software. FedEx also has SmartPost. They all provide a substantial amount of work share involved with their agreements, where other people that are out there, especially the ones that are going through PC postage, they're getting the rates of a UPS or an Amazon by shipping one package through PC postage. So, and in those cases, the PC postage vendor is not touching the package, not in the work share, so it's a completely different scenario. So you know, from what I'm saying, I don't know the terms of those individual agreements. I haven't been privy to them. If I were, I'm sure I'd be signing NSAs, you know, to the place I couldn't talk. But I'm sure that in knowing the parties that they're just doing what they've been offered by the post office.
One other question, I hope I'm loud enough. For Mike, earlier on, you negotiated the first service deal, NSA, Mike, as you said, with Capital One. Where do people go within the Postal Service to negotiate service agreements today, and which apparently are mostly in the competitive side of the business and parcels? How's that processed? Is it through? Okay, you know the answer.
Well, back then there wasn't a process. We were trying to create one. Now there's, well, to be involved in a market dominant NSA, you'd have to be an established mailer. You would contact probably the Postal Service sales organization. They require 6 years of volume and revenue data to get a market dominant NSA going. It's a lot simpler on the competitive side, but the contact points are the same. It's the Postal Service's sales organization to get started. Then there's internal vetting by different organizations, pricing, which falls under the Chief Financial Officer's office. And the law department is also heavily involved in vetting any possible agreement, even before it becomes a contract.
But in the competitive side, the parcel side, where does one go to negotiate an agreement?
Well, the Postal Service will come find you. They've got salespeople out trying to identify business, and they'll find you.
You go to your BSN.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah.
I think that about wraps it up. So we'll have about a 20-minute break for networking, refreshments, and then we'll come back for a panel.